Gospel of St. John. It's 450 pages longer than Ignatius Press. It took 2 years of my life, and it's one of my great joys. I love that. But every time I read the Gospel of John, I want to rewrite that book because there's so many more things in there. The Gospel of John, I've concluded, is like going across the Sea of Galilee in a boat. If you go across this beautiful thing, you see the fish jumping and the birds flying and the clouds and the seashore. Wonderful sight. But if you get scuba gear and you dive off that boat into the Sea of Galilee, it's a whole different world under there. It's the same Sea of Galilee, but you're seeing a whole nother level of the sea. And in John's gospel is the same. The others are too, but even more so John, because he's not just writing to you and telling you about the story of Jesus, but that is so deep with spiritual allegories and typology and double, triple, quadruple meanings that are below the surface. It's just fantastic, and you can never get to the bottom of it. So I want to just share a few things about it, especially in relationship to this place. John does what I call bookending. He always bookends things. So if there's something important, you'll find it at the beginning and you'll find it again at the end. For example, Peter. Where do you find about Peter at the beginning? Well, in John chapter 142, Jesus meets him. His name is Simon, says, "Nice to meet you, Simon. You're going to be called the Rock," Cephas. John knows you don't know what that means, so he puts in parentheses, which means the rock. So he's already told you, even before we get to Matthew 16, where he says, "You are Peter, the rock," and on this, he's already told you that when he first meets Peter, that he's going to be called the Rock. Then where do you see Peter at the end of the Gospel of John? John chapter 21, verses 15 through 17. "Feed my sheep and tend my lambs." He appoints Peter. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. He appoints Peter to be his shepherd. So he's the rock at the beginning, and he's going to be the shepherd of the sheep, tending and feeding the lambs at the end. You have, the whole gospel has a bookend, which I think is kind of overarches the others. At the beginning of the Gospel of John, he makes a very preposterous, outrageous statement. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and this curly-haired little Jewish guy with flies buzzing around his head is God." That's an outrageous statement to make, because the Jews said that God is not a man, nor can you ever see God, but you're telling us this Word that became flesh and dwelt among us is Jesus, is Yeshua, who's walking around with slivers in his hands from working and found brown face and flies. You're telling us he's God. That's a pretty big job to prove. So the rest of the gospel is a proof of that, all the way through, telling you that this is how I can demonstrate to you that he really is God. And then at the end, he gives you the other bookend where he gives you his conclusion. First of all, there's never used in the book of John the word miracle. The other Gospels all have miracle, but in John, it's always a sign. We read that today. He did his first sign here in Cana of Galilee. A sign, what does it do? It points you to something. The signs are there to point you to something. To what? The divinity of Christ. How many signs are there in the Gospel of John? 7. Why 7? Because 7 is the perfect number. It's the number of God. Even in the number of signs, it's telling you that it's God. Now at the end, he's now coming to the conclusion. Has he proved his point with you that this is God, or has he not? The drum roll, please. At the end, it would be very good way to end it for John to say, "Well, I've told you this, I've told you that, and I proved my point," right? But what if he goes a step further and does it even more spectacular? What if he uses the doubter to make the statement? The atheist, the skeptic of the age. The one who says, "I won't believe unless I see it, that I have visible, physical proof." What if he lets the doubter say it? How does the gospel end? Thomas has said, "I won't believe," and then he walks in and Jesus is there and he says, "Thomas, come here. Put your fingers in my hand, put your hand in my side, and don't be doubting but believe." And Thomas falls on his knees and says, "My Lord and my God." The doubter says it. John's proved his point. Now there's others of these parallels too. I won't go through all of them, but I want to do the one that relates to here. In the Gospel of John, we see here there are 6 stone water jars. And all of a sudden you say, wait a minute, if there's water here, it's also going to be at the end, but let's deal with it here first. There are how many stone water jars? 6 of them, and they held around 20 to 30 gallons. That means that was 150 gallons of the best wine ever made, by the way. 150 gallons, that's how much it was. That's how big those stone jars are. But no, remember I said that 7 was the number of perfection, the number of God? 6 is 1 beer short of a 6. 6 means it's the number of man, the number of sin, the number of incompleteness. 6 is not a good number in the Bible. It's not complete. You need one more to make it complete than the number of God. So you have 6 stone water jars, and they're for purification of who? Are they for you? No, they're for the Jews. Do they cleanse anything on the inside? No, only the externals, pots and pans, Mark tells us, the Gospel of Mark. And only for the Jews, and they're incomplete. We need something more. Jesus, at the end of the Gospel, where do you find water again? I'll give you a hint.
From his side?
From the side of Christ comes water. You can picture Jesus as becoming the 7th jar. He's now completed. The 6 are now 7. And the water that's coming now, this is representing baptism, is not just for the Jews, but it's for all of us. It's universal now because it's now 7, the complete number, the number of God is fulfilled. And the water at the end of the gospel is for the cleansing, not just of the Jew, but for all the world, and not just for externals, but it starts and cleans you right from the inside out. Isn't that cool? I just love that. Now, I'll just say a couple more things in relationship to this. That blood and water that comes from the side of Jesus. Remember, John was splashed with that because he was there. And that came out, John was there for that, and Mary as well. It's interesting that John tells you, and we'll talk about this again in Gethsemane, that Jesus was crucified in a garden. And he was buried in a garden. Doesn't this seem strange? You don't put an electric chair in a garden. Why would you crucify someone in a garden? But John wants you to make a connection. When you hear garden, what should you think? Eden. All the way back to Eden, there was a garden, right? The first Adam was in the Garden of Eden. The second Adam is in the Garden of Golgotha. In the first garden, God saw Adam that he had just created, and he said, it is not good for man to be alone. He needs a bride, which all of us are celebrating here today. And therefore, he made a bride, and he put Adam to sleep in a garden, and he cut open Adam's side, took part of Adam's body out, fashioned it into a bride, and Adam woke up and wrote the first poetry that we know of, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone, she shall be called woman, she is so gorgeous. Now, we have a new Adam who's coming to start a new humanity, and he happens to be in a garden, and God says to him, my son needs a bride. So in the garden, he puts the second Adam to sleep on the cross. He cuts open his side with the lance. Out comes blood and water, which are the initiatory rites of the church, baptism and the Eucharist. And from that portion that comes out of Jesus' body, God the Father creates a bride, the church. And Jesus wakes up at the resurrection and he says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, I love my bride. Parallels between the Old and New Testament. That's what I'm going to try and help you see as we go along this trip, as many as we can of this, and how John weaves the story together. So the Gospel of John, chapter 2, you see here in the whole Gospel a fulfillment of what was already taking place, what God had planned, and you see the fulfillment of that plan, even to the cleansing of the whole world from the water that comes from the side of Christ. There's so much more of the Gospel of John. We're only getting started here. What? Oh yes, Mary, okay, Mary Janet reminds me. Mary is also another parallel, another bookending. You have Mary where at the beginning? John only mentions Mary twice, actually, by name. So I used to, as a Protestant, used to say, you Catholics, you sure make a whole lot more about Mary than the Bible does. You make her the fourth person of the Trinity, you almost worship her, don't you? I make fun of her. But what the Gospel of John only mentions her twice, and I made a big point of that when I argued with Catholics. But understanding how John writes, where does he mention Mary first? At the very beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, right? And where does he mention Mary again? At the very last moment of Jesus. He bookends the whole ministry of Jesus with Mary. She bookends the whole ministry of Jesus. In fact, how important is she? At the beginning, Jesus said, it's not my hour yet. What hour? The hour when I do my first miracle, the world's going to see, and they're going to believe, and then everything's going to change, Mom. I've been living with you. Dad's gone. He died, but I'm still living there in the cave with you. That's where we're going after lunch, to that cave. I'm still living here in that cave, but Mom, you have to realize, when I do my first sign, my miracle, I'm going to have to say goodbye, because everything's going to change. And Mary, I think, had a tear in her eye when she said, do whatever he tells you, because she knew that once Jesus did that first miracle, he was no longer going to be able to come back to the cave with her every night and say the morning prayers and the evening prayers. And she used to sit there at the entrance of the cave waiting for her son to come home from work over the hill, and I'll tell you where he went to work when we get there. And she used to be so happy because she lived for that boy running to get his dinner ready and everything. You know, he's coming home, we're going to pray together. But when she said, do whatever he tells you, she had a tear in her eye because it was another way of saying goodbye. I'm going to miss you. I'm not going to see you come over the hill anymore. You're now going to go serve your heavenly Father, and you're going to end up dying, and it's going to pierce my soul as well. So Mary bookends the whole life of the ministry of Jesus. And when he said, it's not my hour yet to do this, she said, yes, it is. Mary is the one that told Jesus when his earthly ministry was going to begin, even against his own choice of when it's going to begin. She told him when it was going to begin. And I like the way Amr says it. He doesn't say, Mary just told him. He says, Mom, it's not my time yet. She doesn't even pay attention to him. She just says to the servants, go do whatever he tells you, and she walks back to the women. But just to give you a little introduction to this place from the biblical passage there in the Gospel of John, because we're going to dig into the Gospel of John a lot more as we go along. So God bless you. Thanks for listening.